Good morning, Wabash. Speaking today at Pioneer Chapel will be Josh Bleisch with his talk titled Honoring the Gentleman's Rule in Today's Dialogue. Josh Bleisch, class of 2016, is a First Amendment lawyer at the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression in Washington, D.C. His job involves using litigation to hold government entities to account for violating Americans' rights to free speech. Josh is the oldest of three Bleisches who graduated from Wabash, with Zach, class of 2018, and Sam, class of 22, following in his footsteps. While at Wabash, Josh was a member of Lambda Chi Alpha, swam breaststroke for the swimming and diving team, and was the president of College Democrats. Josh lives in D.C. with his wife, Morgan, and their 7-month-old daughter, Juliet. Let's give a warm welcome to Josh.
Good morning, Wabash. Good morning, Josh. Feels so good to say that and stand up here as an alum. Thank you so much. So first off, I want to thank Louis Dellinger and the Sphinx Club for inviting me to speak today. It's really, like I said, as an alum, it's a true honor to be up here speaking to you all. I'd also like to thank Professor Scott Himsel for inviting me to campus in the first place and asking me to join him for a session of his con law class this morning. I think we had a lot of fun, so thanks for sharing that time with me as well. I'd also be remiss if I didn't give a special shout out to my dad, Tom Bleisch, honorary brother of the Alpha Kappa Zeta of Lambda Chi Alpha, who died of brain cancer nearly 2 years ago. While he didn't go to Wabash himself, he truly was obsessed with this place, so much so that he would take time out of his lunch breaks to watch videos of chapel talks just so he could talk about them with his sons. He'd be so thrilled that today it's my turn to get up here and give a chapel talk. So thanks, Dad. So with that, let me get into the meat of what I plan to talk about with you all today. I spend most of my days thinking, reading, and writing about free speech, so of course, that's what I'm going to talk about with you today. But I also want to do so in a way that's specific to Wabash as an institution and specific to you all as students, and I hope to leave you all with some thoughts on what free speech means at a place like Wabash. Now is also a good time to state that the obligatory everything that I say today represent my views only and not those of FIRE as an organization. So what's it like to work for a free speech group? What's it like to work in an office with religious conservatives, libertarians, Marxists, and everything in between? Well, it's a little bit like living in the Lambda Chi house. In fact, one of my favorite pastimes when I was a student here was to bust open a 12-er of some cold, typical Wabash refreshments and argue with my neoconservative roommate about why Bernie Sanders was indeed the best choice for president. So it's no wonder that I ended up at FIRE, where our favorite game at happy hours is sharing your best, hottest takes, and where we act as sort of the referees in the culture war, trying to make sure that everyone plays by the rules, usually pissing off both sides at various points with our calls. But it's important to have principled actors where seemingly everyone is trying to press their own advantages in any way they can. One of the common ways we're seeing those in power trying to curtail expressive rights for their own benefit is through drag bans. Sometimes this is done rather inelegantly, such as Montana's attempts to ban performers of any gender who, quote, use glamorous or exaggerated costumes and makeup from their public libraries. That's bad news for anyone who wants to dress up as a founding father and read the Declaration of Independence on the 4th of July. Those costumes are pretty exaggerated, I would say. In Tennessee, the ACLU actually just recently won a $500,000 settlement with the city of Murfreesboro for their passage of an unconstitutional ordinance that sought to ban drag shows from public property. And right now, my colleagues at FIRE were currently in court suing West Texas A&M University after its president abruptly canceled a drag show that was organized by an LGBTQ student group. This president canceled the drag show despite acknowledging in his announcement about that cancellation that, quote, the law of the land in other words, the First Amendment to the Constitution, seems to prevent him from doing just that, but he didn't let that stop him. And thus, he illustrates the importance of a strong free speech culture, standing as a second pillar alongside the First Amendment, holding up democracy and free inquiry in our society. The First Amendment exists in the way that it does today thanks to a rich culture of free speech that this country had beginning around the middle of last century, so a relatively recent development. But a free speech culture ensures that good law doesn't change as political winds shift and as court compositions change. Strong free speech culture can also prevent government officials from violating the First Amendment in the first place, helping us to stay out of court and saving us a lot of time and money. Indeed, as students in Himsel's con law class this semester know, as late as the First World War, the Supreme Court allowed the government to imprison Hoosier Eugene V. Debs for his anti-war advocacy. And it allowed the prosecution of a socialist anti-war protesters for distributing flyers that encouraged Americans to resist the draft, because according to the court, those presented a clear and present danger to the nation. But thankfully, the court soon thereafter changed the way it thinks about the First Amendment, and by the end of the 60s, most of the groundwork for our current First Amendment jurisprudence was put in place. But it didn't have to be this way. We're really kind of fortunate. For the first 100+ years of our republic, it was normal to lock up dissenters for sedition. Despite the image that they like to project, courts are not institutions that are insulated from broader American culture. So as our culture became more approving, supportive, and defensive of free speech as a value, the law supporting the First Amendment became stronger. We need both a strong base of First Amendment jurisprudence and a strong free speech culture. As the great Judge Learned Hand said, "Liberty lies in the hearts of men and women. When it dies there, no constitution, no law, no court can save it." Although, a quick side note about Judge Learned Hand, even he upheld the convictions of Communist Party members simply for being communists under the Smith Act in 1951. So really, nobody is immune from this. It's human nature. So let me now state something obvious. And I did, again, just come from Himsel's con law class, so maybe this is apt. But the First Amendment, Wabash is a private college, so the First Amendment doesn't have any force here. But does that mean it has no place on this campus whatsoever? I don't think that's right. I think a free speech culture lives within the gentleman's rule. A Wabash man is expected to conduct himself at all times, both on and off campus, as a gentleman and a responsible citizen. That's all we have to guide ourselves and our actions. No multi-page handbooks with speech codes, no free speech zones where we shun those who want to speak their minds. We just have the gentleman's rule. To act as a gentleman and a responsible citizen is to value free expression, even for those who you disagree with or whose views you find repulsive. A gentleman listens respectfully to others' thoughts, and a responsible citizen uses his own voice to persuade, playing his part in our self-governance. To act as a gentleman and a responsible citizen is to approach disputes with curiosity and the presumption of goodwill on the part of the people you were speaking with. Of course, this doesn't mean that you can decide that you can't decide you don't want to associate with assholes. It just means that we want to try not to be too quick to come to the conclusion that someone is unworthy completely of talking to. And I know this can be hard, especially when you have national figures who don't act in good faith, but instead seek to divide, scandalize, and appeal to the base fears and emotions in order to accrue power no matter the cost. But I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about your friends, your classmates, your family, your neighbors. And I'm sure, and I hope, that many of you have experiences like mine, debating the issues in class on your own time, or in class or in your own time, possibly over some German sodas, or maybe you're afraid to share what you really think because you don't know how others will react. When I was here, Wabash had a pretty conservative student body, and I was one of the small number of liberals. I'm sure that hasn't changed very much, or I don't know, maybe it's completely flipped. Either way, I hope you find value in speaking freely and in giving others ample space to do the same. Even if speaking with those who you disagree with doesn't lead to either of you changing your minds, it'll make your own arguments stronger, better considered. Iron sharpens iron. In the Wabash community, under the gentleman's rule, free speech must be a shared norm to be discussed, expressed, and lived. This shared norm is important because political winds always shift. Even when it doesn't seem like they do, they always do. What is acceptable today may be offensive tomorrow and vice versa. And in this way, supporting free speech is kind of an act of humility. You always leave room for the possibility that you are wrong, or that when presented with an opposing viewpoint and supporting facts, your own views might change. And this shared norm is also especially important now. The world outside these scarlet halls seems increasingly unstable. Bitter division is the norm. We're again in an election year. We're running headlong for a rematch of 2020, an election cycle that ended in a violent uprising at the US Capitol. Russia is entering its third year of aggression in Ukraine, and Israel continues its bombardment of Gaza, and supporters of both sides of that conflict are being silenced for their views and for their support. It can seem like there's no point in talking anymore. They're just words. What can they really do? But when speech ends, violence often begins. We use our voices so that we don't instead use our fists. So my final message to you all is honor the gentleman's rule by speaking up, by voicing your thoughts, by listening seriously when others do the same. Thank you so much for your time.